People say, when I get money, I'll do something. And money says, hey man, you do something, and only then will I come to you. Hello, and today's discussion is about money. That is, we'll be talking about the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, written by Robert T. Kiyosaki. Before I say anything more about the introduction of this book, I'm reminded of a quote by my doctor at Coxon. He wrote, Rich Dad, Poor Dad doesn't teach shortcuts to becoming rich. It teaches how to build awareness about money, how to fulfill your financial responsibilities, and then how to become rich. So, let's begin. Friends, whenever the word responsibility comes up, I'm reminded of the man who, no matter how many setbacks or sorrows he faced in life, took our share of sorrow upon himself and gave us his share of happiness. That is, Dad. Even when his pockets were empty, I never saw him refuse to give me something. I've never seen a richer person in this world than my father. Keeping that father in mind, Robert T. Kiyosaki made him the main character of the story to try and impart the most important lessons in life. From childhood to youth, we just run after numbers. The way we are educated, the method of our studies, we've only heard from childhood to study, study, study. And after reaching a certain level, after reaching a certain age, we are told to decide what to do now.
Robert T. Kiyosaki beautifully highlights this point, that from childhood, financial knowledge should be taught as a subject in our schools and colleges. If the meaning of education today is to be successful in life and earn more money, then why shouldn't we learn the skill of managing money properly from childhood? School lasts for 6 to 8 hours, but the rest of the time is spent at home. So whether it's school or home, there's nothing wrong with teaching a child from a young age about the importance of money, its necessity, and how to manage it. I think this subject was missing somewhere. Maybe the struggle has been going on for many years that it should be started. It should be explained. Many movies have also been made on this, but even today, we are just running after numbers, numbers, and more numbers. If we learn the strategy to manage money properly, if our understanding improves, then I think the children of today, when they grow up, will be happy. To complete a person, their family, loved ones, friends, and lifestyle are all very important. It can't be said that money is everything, but yes, money is necessary to get everything. The book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is dedicated to parents all over the world because they are a child's most important teachers. And it's also dedicated to those people who set an example, educate children, make an impression on them, and lead them. Gratitude. When there are so many people to thank, how can anyone say thank you? Certainly, for this book, I am grateful to my two fathers who were strong role models, and also to my mother, who taught me the lessons of love and kindness. Exactly 20 years ago, on June 1st, 1967, the Beatles released their album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It reached the pinnacle of commercial and critical success. The album was #1 on the UK album charts for 27 weeks, and in America for 15 weeks. Time magazine called Sgt. Pepper's a historical turning point in the advancement of music.
It won 4 Grammy Awards in 1968, and it also won Album of the Year. It was the first rock album to receive this honor. Rich Dad, Poor Dad was published on my 50th birthday, April 8, 1997. Unlike the Beatles story, this book was not an instant success, neither from a commercial point of view nor from a critical one. In fact, the criticism that followed the book's publication was quite the opposite. Rich Dad, Poor Dad was originally self-published because every publisher we went to rejected my book. Some of the rejection letters had comments like, "You don't know what you're talking about." In 1997, Rich Dad, Poor Dad was a warning, a book for everyone about the future. 20 years later, millions of people around the world have become more aware of the warnings and lessons my rich dad gave about the future. Many, with the foresight of 2020, have said that his teachings were prophetic. The predictions came true. Some of these lessons are: Rich Dad's lesson number 1. The rich don't work for money. 20 years ago, many of my publishers rejected my book because they didn't agree with the first lesson of the rich dad. Today, people are more aware of the growing gap between the rich and everyone else. Between 1993 and 2010, more than 50% of America's national income went to the richest 1%. Since then, the situation has worsened. Economists at the University of California found that 95% of income growth between 2009 and 2012 went to that richest 1%. Lesson: income growth isn't going to employees, it's going to entrepreneurs and investors, not to people who work for money. Rich Dad's lesson: savers are losers. 20 years ago, most publishers strongly disagreed with this lesson from the rich dad. For the poor and middle class, saving money is a religion, a way out of poverty, and a protection from a cruel world. Many thought that calling savers losers was sacrilegious.
A picture is worth 1,000 words. If you look at the 120-year chart of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, you will see why and how savers lost. The chart shows that there were 3 major stock market crashes in the first decade of this new century. The chart illustrates these crashes. The first crash was the dot-com bubble crash around 2000. The second crash was the real estate crash of 2007. And the third was the banking crash of 2008. When you compare the 3 crashes of the 21st century with the huge crash of 1929, you realize just how massive those first 3 crashes of this century were. Note: printing notes. The chart shows that after each crash, the American government and the Federal Reserve Bank started printing notes. Saving the rich. Between 2000 and 2016, in the name of saving the economy, banks all over the world lowered interest rates and continued to print notes. While our leaders wanted us to believe that they were saving the world, the reality was that the rich were saving themselves and pushing the poor and middle class under the bus. Today, interest rates are less than 0 in many countries, so savers lose. Today, the biggest losers are the poor and middle class who work for money and save it. Rich Dad's lesson: your house is not an asset. 20 years ago, in 1997, every publisher who sent me a rejection letter criticized this lesson from the rich dad, that your house is not an asset. 10 years later, in 2007, when subprime borrowers stopped paying installments on their subprime mortgages, the world's real estate bubble burst, and millions of homeowners learned the hard truth of this lesson. Their houses were indeed a liability. The real problem: most people don't know that the real estate crash wasn't actually a real estate crash. The real estate crash wasn't caused by the poor, but by the rich. The rich created financial products called derivatives, which Warren Buffett called weapons of mass financial destruction. When these collective weapons of financial destruction exploded, the real estate market collapsed, and the blame was placed on the poor subprime borrowers.
In 2007, there were about $700 trillion in financial derivatives. Today, it is estimated that there are $1.2 quadrillion in financial derivatives. In other words, the real problem hasn't decreased, it has grown. 20 years ago, many publishers criticized Rich Dad Poor Dad for revealing how and why the rich pay less tax. One said that this lesson was illegal. 10 years later, in 2007, President Barack Obama was running for re-election against former Governor Mitt Romney. When it was revealed that President Obama paid about 30% of his income in taxes and Governor Romney paid less than 13%, Mitt Romney's popularity started to decline and he lost the election. Again, tax became a central issue in the 2016 American presidential election. Instead of figuring out why Mitt Romney and President Trump legally paid less tax, the poor and middle class got angry. Although President Trump promised to cut taxes for the poor and middle class, the reality is that the rich will always pay less in taxes. The reason the rich pay less tax is found in Rich Dad's Lesson 1, The Rich Don't Work for Money. As long as a person works for money, they will pay tax. When presidential candidate Hillary Clinton was promising to raise taxes on the rich, she wasn't promising to raise taxes on the real rich, but on high-income people like doctors, actors, and lawyers. 20 years ago, although Rich Dad Poor Dad didn't achieve instant success like the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's album, it did reach the New York Times bestseller list by 2000 and stayed on that list for almost 7 years. Also in 2000, I got a call from Oprah Winfrey. I was on the Oprah show for an entire hour, and the rest is history. Rich Dad Poor Dad has become the #1 personal finance book in history, and about 40 million books from the Rich Dad series have been sold worldwide. Was there really a rich dad? Millions of people have asked if there really was a rich dad. To answer this question, you can listen to Mike, the Rich Dad's son, when he was a guest on the Rich Dad radio show. You can listen to that show by going to richdadradio.com. Rich Dad Graduate School. Rich Dad Poor Dad was written as simply as possible so that every person could understand my Rich Dad's lessons. For those who want to learn more, as part of the 20-year celebration, I have written Why the Rich Are Getting Richer. What is financial education, really? Why the Rich Are Getting Richer explains in more detail and clarity what the rich dad taught his son and me about money and investing. Why the Rich Are Getting Richer is Rich Dad Poor Dad for graduate students. It is the graduate school for rich dad students.
A warning and an invitation. Although I have tried to keep Why the Rich Are Getting Richer as simple as possible, what the rich really do is not simple, nor is it easy to understand. What the rich do requires real financial education, which is not taught in our schools. I suggest that you first read Rich Dad Poor Dad. After that, if you want to learn more, then maybe it begins with a life and a person. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Introduction. I had 2 dads, so I had the option of 2 opposing viewpoints, one from a rich man and one from a poor man. I had 2 dads, one rich and one poor. One was highly educated and intelligent. He was a PhD and completed a 4-year undergraduate course in 2 years. After that, he went on to study at Stanford University, the University of Chicago, and Northwestern University, of course, on a full scholarship. The second dad couldn't even pass the 8th grade. Both were successful in their professions. Both worked hard their entire lives. Both earned a lot of money. But one always struggled financially, and the other later became one of the richest people in Hawaii. One left millions of dollars for his family, charities, and church upon his death, while the other left unfinished bills that needed to be paid. Both were strong, charming, and influential. Both gave me advice, but they didn't advise me to do the same things. Both put a lot of emphasis on education, but they didn't suggest the same curriculum to study. If I had only one dad, I might have accepted or rejected his advice. Having 2 dads gave me the option of opposing viewpoints, one from a rich man and another from a poor man. Instead of accepting or rejecting either viewpoint, I would think deeply about what they said, compare them, and then choose my own option. The problem was that the rich dad wasn't rich at that time, and the poor dad wasn't poor at that time. Both were starting their careers and were struggling financially and familially. However, their views on money were extremely different.
For example, one dad would say, "The love of money is the root of all evil," while the other dad would say, "The lack of money is the root of all evil."
The strong but different advice from both of them would confuse me a lot in my childhood. Like a good boy, I wanted to listen to them and act accordingly. The problem was that the two dads didn't say the same things. There was a huge difference in their viewpoints, especially on the matter of money. This would confuse me a lot, but it also sparked my curiosity. I would think for a long time about what each of them said and why they said it. In my free time, I would mostly think about this and ask myself the question, why did he say that? Then I would ask the same question about the things the other dad said. I love both, so I was forced to think and ultimately choose a method of thinking for myself. In this process, choosing an option for myself proved to be very valuable in the future, which would not have been possible by simply accepting or rejecting any viewpoint. The rich get richer, the poor stay poor, and the middle class drown in debt. One reason for this is that the subject of money is taught at home, not in school. Most of us learn about money from our parents. What can poor parents teach their children about money? They just say, go to school and study hard. Maybe the child finishes their studies with great grades, but their financial programming and mindset will still be like a poor person. Unfortunately, the subject of money is not taught in schools. This is largely because the highly educated politicians and government officials who are making financial decisions have little to no training in the subject of money. Today, I often wonder what will happen when soon there will be millions and millions of people among us who will need financial and medical assistance. They will be dependent on their families or the government for financial assistance. What will happen when Medicare and Social Security money runs out? How will the country survive if the task of teaching children about money is left to parents, most of whom are either already poor or on their way to becoming poor? Because I had two influential dads, I learned from both of them. I had to think about the advice of each dad, and by doing so, I gained very valuable knowledge about how a person's thoughts affect their life.
A statement and a question. The rich dad often reminded me that there is a big difference between a statement and a question. A statement is a declaration, while a question forces you to think. My soon-to-be rich dad would explain to me how saying "I can't afford it" makes your brain stop working. On the other hand, asking the question "How can I afford it" makes your brain active. This didn't mean that you would buy everything you liked, but rather that he was interested in exercising his brain, which he considered to be the most powerful computer in the world. He would say, "My brain's power increases every day because I exercise it. The stronger it gets, the more money I earn." He believed that automatically saying "I can't afford it" was a sign of mental laziness. Although both dads worked hard, I noticed that financially, one was in the habit of keeping his brain dormant, and the other was in the habit of exercising his brain. As a result, in the long run, one dad started to become financially stronger, and the other started to become weaker. Understand it like this. One person goes to the gym regularly and exercises, while the other sits on the sofa and watches TV. What will be the result? Just as proper physical exercise increases your chances of staying healthy, proper mental exercise increases your chances of getting rich. My two dads had different viewpoints, and this affected their way of thinking. One dad thought that the rich should pay more tax so that the poor could benefit. The other dad would say, tax punishes productive people and rewards unproductive people. One dad would advise, study hard so you can get a good job at a good company. The other dad would give this advice, study hard so you can start your own company. One dad had a ban on talking about money at the dinner table. One would say, where money is concerned, play it safe, don't take risks. The other would say, learn to manage risks. One dad believed, our house is our biggest investment and our biggest asset. The other dad believed, my house is a liability, and if your house is your biggest investment, then you are in a crisis.
Both would pay their bills on time, but one would pay his bills first, while the other would pay his bills last. One dad thought that the company or government should take care of you and your needs. He was always worried about salary increases, retirement plans, medical benefits, sick leave, number of holidays, and other benefits. He was influenced by his two uncles who had joined the Army, and after 20 years of active service, they had earned a lifetime retirement and rights package. He also praised the medical benefits and other facilities given by the Army to retired employees. He also liked the long career tenure available at the university. Many times, the idea of lifelong job security and benefits seemed more important than the job itself. He would often say, "I have worked very hard for the government, so I deserve these kinds of benefits." The other dad believed entirely in financial self-reliance. He was against the mentality of being opportunistic or having a sense of entitlement, and would say that this mentality makes people weak and financially dependent. He put a lot of emphasis on being financially capable. One dad would struggle to save a few dollars, while the other would create investments.
One dad taught me how to write an impressive resume or biodata to find a good job, while the other taught me how to write strong business and financial plans so that I could give jobs to others. Having two strong dads gave me the opportunity to analyze how different ways of thinking have different effects on life. I noticed that people actually shape their lives with their thoughts. For example, my poor dad would always say, "I can never be rich," and in the future, his prediction came true. On the other hand, my rich dad always considered himself rich. He would say things like, "I'm rich, and rich people don't do that." Even when he was on the verge of bankruptcy after a big financial setback, he would still call himself a rich man. In his support, he would say, "There's a difference between being poor and being broke. Being broke is temporary. Being poor is permanent." My poor dad would say, "I'm not interested in money," or "money isn't important." My rich dad would always say, "Money is a form of power." The power of our thoughts can never be measured, nor can their full impact be understood. However, even as a young boy, I realized I needed to focus on my thoughts and my expression. I noticed that my poor dad wasn't poor because he earned less money. His salary was quite good. He was poor because of his thoughts and his actions. Having two strong dads made me very careful and aware as a young boy about which thoughts to accept and whose advice to follow, my rich dad's or my poor dad's. Although both of them considered education and learning very important, they had different views on what should be learned. One wanted me to study hard, get a degree, and find a good job to earn money. He wanted me to study for a profession or to become a lawyer or an accountant and get an MBA from a business school. The other dad encouraged me to study to become rich so I could understand how money works and learn how to make it work for me. "I don't work for money," he would often say. I decided to follow my rich dad's advice on money and learn from him. This also meant deciding to ignore my poor dad's advice, even though he had a high college degree. The Lesson of Robert Frost. Robert Frost is my favorite poet. While I love many of his poems, The Road Not Taken is my most cherished. I apply its lesson almost every day.
The road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day.
yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Over the years, I've often reflected on Robert Frost's poem. The decision not to follow my highly educated dad's advice and viewpoint about money was painful, but it was a decision that set the direction of my life. Once I made the decision about whose advice to follow, my financial education began. My rich dad taught me for 30 years until I was 39 years old. Then he stopped teaching because he realized I had learned everything and fully understood what he had so often tried to pound into my thick skull. Money is a form of power, but financial education is even more powerful. Money comes and goes, but if you know how money works, you can control it and begin to build wealth. Positive thinking alone doesn't work. This is because most people went to school and college, but they never learned how money works, so they spend their whole lives working for money. When my education began, I was only 9 years old, so the lessons my rich dad taught me were simple. In fact, he had only 6 main lessons, which he repeated for 30 years. This book is about those 6 lessons, told as simply as my rich dad taught them to me. Remember, the point of these lessons isn't just to provide answers. They're meant to be a guide that will help you and your children become richer no matter what happens in this constantly changing and uncertain world. Chapter 1, Lesson 1. Rich people don't work for money. The poor and the middle class work for money. The rich don't work for money. The rich make money work for them. Teddy, can you tell me how to get rich? My dad put down the evening newspaper. Son, why do you want to get rich? Because today Jimmy's mom came in their new Cadillac and they're going to their beach house for the weekend. She took 3 of his friends but didn't take Mike and me. They told us we weren't invited because we're poor. They said that? My dad asked in disbelief. Yes, they did, I replied, hurt.
My dad nodded in silence. He put his glasses back on his nose and went back to reading the newspaper. I stood there waiting for an answer. This was 1956. I was 9 years old. Coincidentally, I attended the same public school as the children from wealthy families. The plantation managers and other wealthy people in the colony, like doctors, businessmen, and bankers, sent their children to this primary school. After 6th grade, their children were usually sent to private school. Since my family lived on this side of the street, I went to this school. If I'd lived on the other side of the street, I would have gone to a different school, where children from families like mine went. After 6th grade, I would have had to go to the public intermediate and high schools with these kids. There were no private schools for them or for me. My dad finally put down the newspaper. I knew he was thinking about something. Look, son, he began slowly, if you want to be rich, you need to learn how to make money. I asked, how do I make money? He laughed and said, look, son, use your brain. That's when I understood his true meaning. That's all I can tell you, or I don't know the answer, so don't bother me. The next morning, I told my best friend Mike what my dad had said. As far as I knew, only Mike and I were the poor kids at that school. Mike was also at this school by coincidence. Someone had drawn a dividing line for the school and the colony, and that's why we ended up at the rich kids' school. To be honest, we weren't very poor, but we felt poor because all the other boys had new baseball gloves, new bikes, everything new. Our parents provided us with all the basic necessities like food, clothes, and a house, but that was it. My dad would say, if you want something, work for it. We wanted a lot of things, but there weren't many jobs available for 9-year-old boys. Mike asked,
"So what are we going to do to make money?" "I don't know," I said, "but will you be my partner?" He agreed, and that Saturday morning, Mike became my first business partner.
We spent the whole morning until noon thinking about how to make money. Sometimes we thought about those rich kids having fun at Jimmy's beach house, which made us a little sad. But that sadness was good because it motivated us to think of ways to make money. Finally, at noon, a light bulb suddenly went off in our heads. It was an idea Mike had found in a science book he had read. Excited, we shook hands, and now our partnership had a business. For the next few weeks, Mike and I ran around the neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they could save their used toothpaste tubes for us. Surprisingly, most adults laughed and said yes. A few asked what we were going to do with them. We would reply, "We can't tell you. It's a business secret." Weeks went by, and my mother's frustration grew. The place we had chosen to collect our raw materials was next to her washing machine. It was a brown cardboard box that had once held ketchup bottles. Now our small pile of toothpaste tubes in it was growing. Finally, my mother's patience ran out. The sight of the neighbors' dirty, bent, used toothpaste tubes was driving her crazy. She asked, "What are you two doing? And I don't want to hear that it's a business secret again. Clean up this junk right now or I'll throw it out." Mike and I begged her for some time. We told her we would have enough tubes soon and then we start production. We told her we were waiting for 2 or 3 neighbors whose toothpaste tubes were about to run out and were supposed to bring them to us. Mom gave us 1 week. The date to start production had come sooner than planned, and the pressure was on. My first partnership was in danger because my own mother had given us an eviction notice. It was Mike's job to tell the neighbors to finish their toothpaste quickly. He also told them that their dentist also believed they should brush more often during the day. I got busy perfecting the production process. One day, my dad came home with a friend. He saw 2 9-year-old boys in full production mode on the porch. Fine white powder was scattered all around. On a long table, there were small milk cartons from school, and our family's hibachi grill was burning at maximum heat with red-hot coals. Dad walked carefully. He had to park the car at the start of the porch because the production process was blocking the car's space. When he and his friend came closer, they saw a steel pot placed on the coals where the toothpaste tubes were melting. At that time, toothpaste didn't come in plastic tubes. The tubes were made of lead. So, after burning off the paint, we would put the tubes in the small steel pot. They would melt and turn into liquid. We were pouring this molten lead into a small hole we had made in a milk carton. The milk carton was filled with plaster of Paris. The white powder scattered around was nothing but plaster of Paris. In a hurry, I had kicked my bag, which made the